You don't survive the underworld by making jokes. But when the head of the Costello syndicate hired a quiet woman in a faded denim jacket to be his personal shadow, everyone laughed. They thought she was a punchline, a human shield made of glass, meant to insult his overly cautious capos. They stopped laughing the night 6 armed hitmen walked into a private room at the Belmont Hotel, and only she walked out. She wasn't a punchline. She was the executioner. Leo Costello hated Thursdays. Thursdays were for accounting, and accounting in a criminal enterprise mostly consisted of sitting in a windowless room, breathing in recycled cigar smoke, and listening to men with thick necks lie about why their envelopes were light. Today was worse than a standard Thursday. Today he also had to replace Tommy. Tommy had been Leo's personal shadow for 5 years. He was 6'4", built like a brick wall, and completely devoid of independent thought. He was exactly what a Mafia boss needed in a bodyguard. Unfortunately, Tommy had stepped out of Leo's armored Lincoln on Tuesday morning and caught 3 ounces of high-velocity lead in his chest. Leo had survived only because Tommy's massive frame had jammed the car door shut as he fell. Now Leo sat in the back office of a high-end meatpacking facility he used as a front, nursing a headache that felt like a localized thunderstorm behind his right eye. His underboss, a walking ulcer named Dom, was parading replacements through the heavy steel door. "Next," Dom barked, rubbing a hand over his balding head. The door creaked open. Leo didn't look up from the ledger on his desk. He waited for the heavy thud of combat boots or the overpowering scent of cheap cologne that usually accompanied these meatheads. Instead, he heard the soft, almost imperceptible squeak of worn rubber soles on concrete. Leo raised his eyes. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was maybe 5'6", drowning in an oversized surplus field jacket that had seen better decades. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, messy knot. She didn't carry herself with the puffed-up chest of a street thug. She just stood there perfectly still, her hands resting easily in her pockets. She looked tired. Bone-deep soul-scraping tired. "What's this?" Leo asked, his voice a low, gravelly scrape in the quiet room. Dom blinked, looking at his clipboard, then at the woman. The agency sent over a list. She was in the waiting room with the others. Figured she was a clerical applicant who got lost. "I'm not lost," the woman said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any inflection. It wasn't defensive, it was just a statement of fact. The sign outside said, "Walk-ins for security logistics." "I need a job." Leo leaned back in his leather chair, the leather groaning in protest. He studied her. No makeup. Dark circles under eyes that were a strange, muddy hazel. She looked at him, not as a feared boss of the city's largest syndicate, but the way someone looks at a delayed train. An inconvenience. "Security logistics," Leo repeated, testing the words. "Do you know who I am?" "You're the guy with the empty chair in the hallway with a blood stain on the upholstery," she said. "Which means your last guy didn't do his job. And now you need a new one." Dom scoffed, stepping forward, his face flushing dull red. "Listen here, sweetheart. This ain't a mall cop gig. You take one wrong turn with us, you end up in a landfill. Go home." The woman didn't look at Dom. She kept her eyes on Leo. "My name is Quinn. I don't drink. I don't sleep much. I don't ask questions. And I need the money." Leo should have told Dom to throw her out. The Costello family was currently in a slow-burn turf war with the Greco brothers. Car bombs were replacing handshakes. Paranoia was the currency of the weak. He needed a wall of muscle, a deterrent, a monster to stand behind his chair and make people think twice before reaching into their coats. But looking at the endless line of identical, brainless gorillas waiting outside, a strange, cynical humor washed over him. The Grecos were expecting him to hire a mercenary. His own men were expecting him to hire a tank. He was sick of the posturing. He was sick of the predictable chess moves of this life. "Give her the job," Leo said. Dom froze. "Boss, come on. You're joking. The Grecos are taking shots at you in broad daylight. She weighs 130 pounds soaking wet. Give her Tommy's gun and Tommy's schedule," Leo said, standing up and grabbing his coat. He walked past Quinn, stopping for a fraction of a second to catch a scent of stale coffee and rain on her jacket. "You drive, Quinn." "I drive," she said. "Good. My car is out back. Try not to get me killed. It ruins my week." Leo walked out, leaving Dom staring open-mouthed at the small woman standing in the center of the slaughterhouse office. It was a joke, a middle finger to the Grecos and a test of his own untouchability. Let them see him walk around with a waif. Let them wonder if he had completely lost his mind, or if he was just that confident. He didn't expect her to last a week. 3 weeks later, the joke was wearing thin, mostly because Quinn refused to act like one. She didn't try to prove herself. She didn't buy a suit. She traded the field jacket for a plain black peacoat, and that was the extent of her assimilation into the Costello family. She was simply a ghost that haunted Leo's periphery. When they rode in the back of the car, she didn't speak unless spoken to. When Leo held meetings in dimly lit restaurant booths, dealing in extortion bribery, and occasionally blood, she stood in the corner. She didn't flinch when voices raised. She didn't look away when Leo casually broke a man's nose with a heavy glass ashtray over a gambling debt. Leo watched her watching him. Most people, even hardened criminals, had a tell when violence erupted. A micro-expression of disgust, a twitch of fear, a tightening of the jaw. Quinn had a nothing. She watched a man bleed on a Persian rug with the same detached interest as someone watching paint dry. It was unnerving. "You don't like blood, Quinn?" Leo asked her one night. They were sitting in the VIP section of a club Leo owned. The bass thumped through the floorboards, rattling the crystal glasses on the table. She stood by his booth, scanning the crowd. She didn't look down at him. "I don't have an opinion on it. It's just plumbing." "Plumbing," Leo mused, rolling a heavy glass of bourbon between his palms. "You know Dom takes bets on when you're going to quit. He thinks the first time you see a real gunfight, you'll faint. Dom breathes exclusively through his mouth," Quinn replied evenly. "I wouldn't trust his cognitive deductions." Leo let out a short, bark-like laugh. It was the first time he had laughed in months. The laugh was cut short by the sound of shattering glass. Across the VIP room, a high-stakes poker game had gone sour. One of Leo's mid-level earners, a jumpy kid named Russo, was screaming at a rival associate. The music in the club was loud, but the sudden, sharp shift in the room's atmosphere cut through the noise, the static of impending violence. Leo didn't move. He just watched. This was his club. His men were supposed to handle it. Russo, high on something synthetic and cheap, kicked his chair back. He reached into his tailored jacket. It happened in the span of a breath. Dom, who was standing near the bar, dropped his drink and fumbled for his weapon, moving like he was underwater. Leo braced himself for the deafening crack of a gunshot, but Quinn was already gone from his side. She didn't run. She flowed. She slipped through the panicked, scattering bodies of the club patrons with frightening efficiency. By the time Russo had his snub-nosed revolver clear of his holster, Quinn was standing slightly behind his right shoulder. She didn't shout a warning. She didn't draw her own gun. She simply reached out, grabbed Russo's wrist with her left hand, and drove the heel of her right palm sharply into the crook of his elbow. There was a dry, sickening snap that was audible even over the heavy bass. Russo didn't even have time to scream before Quinn's hand swept up her fingers, gripping the back of his neck. She slammed his face downward into the heavy oak poker table. The impact sounded like a dropped melon. The gun clattered to the floor. Russo slumped sideways, unconscious before he hit the carpet. The entire VIP section went dead silent. The music still thumped from downstairs, but upstairs the air was entirely sucked out of the room. Quinn calmly bent down, picked up the dropped revolver by the trigger guard, and placed it on the poker table. She didn't look at the men staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't look at Dom, who was standing frozen with his gun half drawn. She walked back over to Leo's booth, took her position by the pillar, and crossed her arms. Her breathing hadn't elevated. Her hair wasn't out of place. Leo stared at her. He looked at the unconscious, bleeding man on the floor, then back at the woman in the cheap peacoat. He was going to shoot the dealer, Quinn said quietly, answering the question Leo hadn't asked. Poor trigger discipline, sweaty palms. Leo slowly picked up his bourbon and took a long, burning swallow. He realized with a sudden icy clarity in the pit of his stomach that he hadn't hired a joke. He hadn't hired a bodyguard. He had accidentally bought a weapon of mass destruction, and he had absolutely no idea where she came from. The invitation was a trap. Leo knew it. Dom knew it. Even the valet out front probably knew it. The Greco brothers had called for a sit-down. Neutral ground. The penthouse suite of the Belmont Hotel, a towering monument of glass and steel in the financial district. The premise was peace. The reality was a firing squad. We don't go, Dom had argued an hour earlier, pacing Leo's office. It's a kill box, boss. Only one elevator up. No fire escapes that aren't alarmed. We go in there. We're fish in a barrel. If we don't go, we look weak, Leo replied, securing a Kevlar vest beneath his tailored suit shirt. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and trapped his body heat, but it had saved his life twice before. Weakness breeds ambition, Dom. You know that. We go. We bring 5 men. We keep it tight. You taking her? Dom jutted a thumb toward the hallway where Quinn was waiting. She's my shadow, Leo said. She goes where I go. Now standing in the high-speed elevator, rocketing toward the 42nd floor, the silence was suffocating. Leo stood in the center, Dom to his right. 3 of his best hitters, broad-shouldered, quiet men, stood behind them. Quinn stood by the door panels, staring blankly at the changing floor numbers. The elevator chimed. Floor 42. The doors slid open. There was no greeting party. There was only a long, opulent hallway, lined with dark cherry wood and thick, sound-dampening carpet. At the far end, double mahogany doors stood slightly ajar, leading into the penthouse. Check the corners, Dom hissed, drawing his weapon. The 3 hitters fanned out, moving down the hallway with practiced precision. Leo walked slowly, his hand resting on the grip of the 9mm tucked into his waistband. The air smelled wrong. It smelled like industrial carpet cleaner, trying to mask the scent of stale cigarette smoke, and something else. Something metallic. Quinn walked slightly ahead of Leo, her eyes darting over the ceiling vents, the light fixtures, the gap beneath the double doors. They reached the entrance. Dom pushed the right door open with the barrel of his gun. The room was massive, bathed in the orange glow of the city lights bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A long glass dining table sat in the center. Sitting at the head of the table was Paulie Greco. He was dead. His head rested in a pool of drying blood on the glass. The peace offering hadn't been a trap for Leo set by the Grecos. It was a trap for both of them, set by someone else. Boss Dom started taking a step back. The whip. The sound was tiny, a suppressed gunshot. The hitter standing to Leo's left folded in half, a neat hole appearing in his throat. He went down hard, blood spraying across the expensive wallpaper. Ambush! Dom roared, firing blindly into the shadows at the far end of the room. Chaos erupted. More suppressed fire rained down from the mezzanine, overlooking the dining room. Glass shattered. The remaining 2 Costello hitters were pinned behind a heavy leather sofa, returning fire with deafening, unsuppressed bursts that chewed through the drywall. Leo drew his gun, diving behind a marble pillar, just as a line of bullets stitched across the plaster, where his head had been a second before. He checked his magazine, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was pinned. Dom was shouting, bleeding from a graze on his arm, pinned behind a tipped-over credenza. There were at least 6 shooters. High ground. Crossfire. They were dead. It was over. Then Leo saw Quinn. She hadn't taken cover with them. When the first shot rang out, she had moved laterally, vanishing into the deep shadows near the kitchen entrance. Leo risked a glance around the pillar. 2 heavily armed men in black tactical gear were advancing from the left flank, moving to outflank Dom's position. Before Leo could line up a shot, a shadow detached itself from the wall behind the advancing men. Quinn didn't shoot. She moved silently, closing the distance with terrifying speed. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron fireplace poker from the hearth as she passed it. She swung it once. It connected with the back of the first man's knee. The joint buckled with a sickening crunch. As the man went down, Quinn didn't stop. She used the momentum of her swing to drive the heavy iron point directly upward, under the edge of his tactical helmet, into his jaw. He dropped like a stone. The second man turned, raising his rifle. Quinn was already inside his guard. She grabbed the hot barrel of the rifle, redirecting it upward as it fired a burst into the ceiling. In the same fluid motion, she drove her knee into his groin, stepping heavily on his instep to pin him. As he doubled over, she took the heavy iron poker and slammed it against his temple. 2 down, 4 seconds. She dropped the poker and snatched the fallen rifle from the floor. She didn't check it. She just rolled over the kitchen counter as the remaining shooters on the mezzanine realized what was happening and redirected their fire toward her. The marble counter shredded under a hail of bullets, filling the air with a thick, choking cloud of white dust. "Covering fire," Leo yelled, stepping out and firing 3 shots toward the mezzanine. Dom and the surviving hitters joined in, forcing the shooters to duck. It was all the window Quinn needed. She vaulted the counter, moving through the blinding marble dust like a wraith. She didn't run wildly. Every step was calculated. She reached the base of the spiral staircase leading to the mezzanine. A shooter leaned over the railing, trying to get an angle on her. Quinn didn't raise the rifle to her shoulder. She fired from the hip in a tight, controlled 3-round burst. The man jerked backward, crashing through the glass railing and falling 20 feet to the dining room floor, his neck snapping on impact. 3 down. Leo watched, utterly paralyzed by the brutal efficiency of it. He had seen violence his whole life. He had ordered it. He had committed it. But this was different. This wasn't anger. This wasn't a turf war. This was an exterminator, clearing a pest infestation. Quinn bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. Gunfire erupted on the mezzanine. A man screamed, then a heavy thud. Silence descended on the penthouse, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of Dom's ragged breathing and the distant wail of police sirens down on the street. Leo slowly stood up, keeping his gun raised. The marble dust was settling. The smell of copper and cordite was overpowering. "Quinn!" Leo called out, his voice sounding hollow in the massive room. A moment later she appeared at the top of the stairs. She was covered in white dust. There was a splash of bright red blood across her pale cheek, though it clearly wasn't hers. She was holding a tactical combat knife in one hand and a stolen sidearm in the other. She walked down the stairs, stepping over the shattered glass and the bodies without looking at them. She reached the bottom, walked over to Leo, and stopped. She checked her cheap plastic wristwatch, wiping a smudge of blood off the face with her thumb. "Police response time in this district is roughly 7 minutes, she said, her breathing only slightly elevated. "We have 3 left. I suggest we take the service elevator." Leo just stared at her, at the blood on her face, at the mountain of dead, heavily armed men surrounding them. "Who the hell are you?" Leo whispered. Quinn looked at him, those muddy hazel eyes devoid of any warmth, any fear, any humanity. "I'm your logistics coordinator," she said. "We should go." The service elevator smelled like industrial bleach and old grease. It ground its way down 42 floors with an agonizing mechanical groan. Inside, no one spoke. Dom was leaning heavily against the steel wall, a wad of cocktail napkins pressed against the bleeding furrow on his bicep. The surviving hitter, a kid named Carlo, was dry-heaving quietly in the corner, his gun hanging loosely from 2 fingers. Leo watched the floor indicator tick down. He felt the adrenaline draining out of his system, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. He looked at Quinn. She was methodically ejecting the magazine from the stolen sidearm, checking the remaining rounds, and slamming it back home. She wiped the blood from her cheek with the back of her sleeve. It smeared into a rusty streak across the dark fabric. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like a mechanic finishing a shift. "Who set it up?" Leo asked. His voice was raw. Quinn slid the gun into her coat pocket. The men upstairs were using suppressed FN-57s, body armor piercing, high-end optics, no identifying patches, but their boots were uniformly laced in a straight bar pattern, military or ex-military, PMC. That wasn't a mob hit. That was a corporate liquidation. Dom scoffed, wincing as he shifted his weight. "Corporate? What are you talking about, you crazy bitch? The Grecos set us up. It was a suicide play. Paulie Greco was dead before we walked in the room," Quinn said calmly, turning her dead-eyed stare on Dom. "Blood coagulation suggests he had been shot at least 20 minutes prior. They used him as bait. They used you as bait. Someone is wiping the board." The elevator jolted to a halt in the underground loading dock. The doors parted. The heavy damp air of the subterranean garage hit them. "My car is parked 3 blocks east," Quinn said, stepping out into the dim fluorescent light. "The Lincoln out front is likely wired with high explosives, or at the very least being watched by a sniper team. We walk. I'm not walking anywhere with you." Dom spat, raising his good arm. His hand was shaking. He pointed a finger at Quinn. "Boss, look at her. Look at what she just did. You think a temp agency sent that she's a plant. She's the one who let them in." Leo looked at Dom, then at Quinn. Dom was terrified. A rat backed into a corner. Quinn was perfectly still, watching Dom the way a predator watches a wounded animal decide which way to limp. "If I wanted you dead, Dominic," Quinn said, her voice dropping an octave, "I wouldn't have used a tactical team. I would have let you bleed out in the hallway upstairs. Put your hand down before I break your other arm." Dom flinched instinctively, pulling his arm back. "Enough," Leo snapped. He stepped between them, feeling the crushing weight of the night pressing down on his shoulders. He was a king without a castle standing in a dirty loading dock. "We take her car. We go to the yard." The yard was an abandoned impound lot on the industrial edge of the city. It was a relic from Leo's father's era, surrounded by razor wire and guarded by 3 very large, very hungry Rottweilers. Inside the rusted corrugated steel office was a cot, a safe, and a burner phone. The drive was agonizing. Quinn drove a beat-up Honda Civic that smelled faintly of pine needles and damp earth. She drove precisely the speed limit. She checked her mirrors every 4 seconds. Leo sat in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past. His empire felt suddenly very fragile. Men in tailored suits, arguing over garbage contracts and union dues, were no match for ghosts in tactical gear dropping through skylights. When they reached the yard, it was pouring rain. The dogs recognized Leo and stayed quiet in their pens. Dom and Carlo went to the back room to patch up. Leo stayed in the main office, pulling a bottle of cheap whiskey from a filing cabinet. He poured 2 glasses. He slid one across the scarred metal desk toward Quinn. She stood by the window, peering through a crack in the blinds at the flooded street outside. She didn't look at the glass. "I don't drink," she said. "Take it anyway," Leo said. He downed his in one swallow. It burned, going down a harsh reminder that he was still alive. "You killed 5 men tonight. 6, if you count the guy you threw off the balcony." 6, she confirmed quietly. Where did you learn to move like that? Quinn let the blind snap shut. She turned around. The harsh, flickering light of the single bulb overhead cast deep shadows beneath her eyes. I was taught, she said. By who? People who are no longer breathing. It was a closed door. A vault. Leo could push, he could demand answers as her boss, but he knew looking at her that authority meant nothing here. The hierarchy of the underworld was a fiction she simply chose to ignore. They're going to come for me, Leo said, leaning forward on the desk. Whoever they are. They took out Paulie Greco. They tried to take out me. They want the city. I need to know if you're going to vanish into the rain, or if I'm paying you enough to stand between me and them. Quinn looked at him. For the first time, Leo saw a flicker of something human behind the muddy hazel of her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. Your money is worthless right now, Leo, she said. She used his first name. It sent a strange jolt through his chest. But I don't run. And I don't leave a job unfinished. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we hunt. Sleep was a luxury Leo couldn't afford. He lay on the lumpy cot in the back room for 3 hours, listening to the rain hammer against the tin roof. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hitter folding in half. He saw the white marble dust. He saw Quinn moving through the haze like an apex predator in tall grass. At 4 a.m. he gave up. He swung his legs off the cot ribs, aching from the Kevlar bruising, and walked back into the main office. Quinn was sitting in the same rolling chair she had occupied hours ago. She hadn't taken off her coat. She sat perfectly straight, a disassembled Glock 19 spread out on a dirty rag across the desk. She was cleaning the barrel with a Q-tip, and solvent the smell of hops number 9 cutting through the damp mildew of the room. You don't sleep either, Leo noted, leaning against the doorframe. Sleep is a vulnerability, she murmured, carefully inspecting the firing pin. I prefer to rest in brief cycles. 20 minutes. It's enough. Leo walked over and dragged up a folding chair sitting across from her. He watched her hands. They were small, but covered in a map of pale, thin scars. Burn marks on the knuckles. A jagged white line running up her left wrist, disappearing beneath the cuff of her sweater. They were the hands of someone who had been broken and put back together with rough stitching. You're bleeding, she said suddenly, not looking up from the gun. Leo frowned, touching his neck. His fingers came away sticky. A shard of marble from the kitchen counter at the Belmont must have clipped him. A thin stream of blood had dried into his collar. Before he could react, Quinn set the firing pin down. She reached into a small canvas bag at her feet and pulled out a basic first aid kit. She stood up, walked around the desk and stopped in front of him. Sit still, she ordered. Leo froze. Her proximity was jarring. She smelled like gunpowder rain and something inherently clean like cold steel. She tore open an alcohol prep pad. This will sting, she said. She pressed the pad to his neck. It burned like fire. Leo gritted his teeth, refusing to flinch. Quinn was close enough that he could see the slight unevenness of her breathing. He could see a tiny crescent-shaped scar just below her left collarbone, visible where her shirt dipped. She wasn't a machine. The realization hit him with a strange, heavy weight. She was bleeding out her own ghosts, hiding them behind a wall of absolute apathy. Why did you take this job, Quinn? Leo asked softly, the distance between them vanishing into inches. You don't care about money. You said it yourself. Her hand paused on his neck. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met his. They were close. Too close. The cynical mob boss and the haunted killer existing in a vacuum of a ruined world. Because sitting in a quiet room is too loud. She said, her voice barely a whisper. I need the noise. I need the static. Your world is very noisy. She taped a butterfly bandage over the cut. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat on his skin. It wasn't a caress. It was a tactical assessment of his pulse. But it burned more than the alcohol. She stepped back abruptly, the wall slamming back into place. "We have a problem," she said, turning back to the desk and rapidly reassembling the Glock. "Besides the private army trying to kill me." "Yes, Dominic." Leo's jaw tightened. "Dom is an idiot, but he's been with my family for 20 years. He's loyal. Loyalty is a shifting metric," Quinn said, sliding the magazine into the grip with a sharp clack. "I checked the call logs on the burner phone while you were pretending to sleep. Dominic made 2 calls from the bathroom an hour ago. The numbers were encrypted. They routed through a server offshore." Leo felt a cold stone drop into his stomach. "He's calling a doctor. His arm is infected." He was whispering Leo, and he locked the door. Quinn looked at him. "The tactical team at the Belmont knew our exact entry time. They knew the floor. They knew Paulie Greco would be vulnerable. Someone gave them the itinerary. Only you, me, and Dominic knew we were going tonight." Leo stared at the rusted metal of the desk. Dom. The man who had taught him how to shoot. The man who had carried his father's casket. "If you're wrong," Leo started. "I'm never wrong about survival geometry," Quinn cut in. "He's scared. The new players terrified him. He sold you out to buy a seat at their table." A heavy silence filled the room. Leo knew she was right. The math worked. The hesitation in Dom's voice, yesterday. The insistence that going to the Belmont was a trap, yet pushing Leo to walk into it, anyway creating plausible deniability. "Where is he?" Leo asked, his voice dead. "He took Carlo out to the perimeter 10 minutes ago. Said he wanted to check the dogs." Leo stood up. He pulled his 9mm from his waistband and chambered around. The metallic slide echoed in the quiet office. "I'll handle it," Leo said. "No." Quinn stepped in front of him, blocking the door. "He expects you to be emotional. He expects you to hesitate. I don't." Leo looked down at her. She was smaller than him, but she felt like a concrete wall. "He's my mess. My family. You're paying me to keep you alive," she said softly. "Let me do my job, Leo." The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, clinging fog over the impound lot. The rusted husks of crushed cars loomed like gravestones in the pale light of dawn. Leo stepped out of the office, his boots crunching softly on the wet gravel. Quinn was a shadow beside him, slipping seamlessly between the blind spots of the floodlights. They found Dom near the chain-link fence at the back of the yard. The dogs were pacing nervously in their pens, whining low in their throats. Carlo was nowhere to be seen. Dom was pacing a burner phone pressed to his ear. His injured arm hung limply at his side. "I told you they survived." Dom hissed into the phone, his voice carrying in the damp air. "The girl is a freak. You said your team could handle her. Now, I'm stuck out here with him, and she's watching my every move. You need to send the cleaners. Now. To the yard." Leo stepped out from behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. "You don't need to yell, Dom," Leo said. Dom spun around, dropping the phone. It splashed into a muddy puddle. His eyes went wide, darting from Leo to the darkness around him. He saw Quinn step out of the shadows, her gun drawn, aimed squarely at his chest. "Boss," Dom stammered, raising his hands, his face pale. "Boss, wait. It's not what it looks like. I was trying to buy us time. Negotiate." "Where's Carlo?" Leo asked. The emptiness in his own voice scared him. Dom swallowed hard. He panicked. He ran. I swear to God, Leo, I was trying to save the family." "Who are they?" Leo asked, ignoring the lie. "A syndicate. Out of Europe. Guy named Holden runs the stateside operations." Dom blurted, sweating despite the cold. "They have limitless money, Leo. Mercenaries. Politicians. They told me they were going to wipe you and the Grecos out anyway. I just wanted to make sure someone from our side survived. To rebuild." "You sold me for scrap," Leo said. "They're coming Leo right now. They tracked the phone." Dom screamed panic, finally breaking him. He lunged for his own gun, clumsily pulling it from his holster with his good hand. He never cleared the leather. 2 suppressed shots coughed in the fog. Thwip. Thwip. Dom's knees buckled. He looked down at the 2 dark holes blooming in his chest. He looked at Leo, his mouth opening and closing silently, before he pitched forward into the mud. Leo didn't flinch. He looked at Quinn. Her gun was still raised. She hadn't blinked. "You didn't let him pull it," Leo said quietly. "I don't believe in fair fights," Quinn replied, lowering the weapon. "We have less than 3 minutes before Holden's cleaners arrive. The dogs are quiet. That means they're already dead. Snipers on the perimeter." As if on cue, a high-caliber round slammed into the shipping container, inches from Leo's head, showering him with rust and sparks. The boom echoed a second later. "Move!" Quinn grabbed his shoulder, yanking him hard to the right. They scrambled behind a crushed school bus as the yard erupted. Floodlights shattered, plunging the lot into darkness. The staccato pop of suppressed submachine guns tore through the fog, chewing through the metal cars around them. "How many?" Leo shouted over the noise. "At least 8. 2 sniper overwatch." Quinn calculated, her voice terrifyingly calm as she checked her angles. "We can't outshoot them. We have to blind them." "How?" Quinn looked at the rows of crushed cars. "Gasoline. The soil here is soaked in it, from years of leaking tanks. We need a spark." She didn't wait for his approval. She broke from cover, sprinting low across the open lane. Bullets kicked up mud at her heels. She dove behind a rusted tow truck. Leo laid down covering fire, aiming blindly at the muzzle flashes in the fog. He felt a burning graze on his shoulder, but ignored it. He wasn't a boss sitting behind a desk anymore. He was a soldier in the dirt. Quinn was beneath the tow truck. She pulled a flare from her deep coat pocket, something she had apparently looted from the safe house. She cracked it, the harsh red light casting demonic shadows across her face. She tossed it not at the men, but at a depression in the ground near a stack of old oil drums. The ground itself caught fire. Years of accumulated fuel and grease ignited in a massive rolling fireball. The shockwave knocked Leo off his feet. The flames leapt 30 feet into the air, turning the fog into a blinding orange wall of heat and smoke. The sniper's thermal optics were instantly useless. The cleaners in the yard were caught in the inferno, screaming as the flames cut off their advance. Now, Quinn appeared out of the smoke, grabbing his arm. She was covered in soot, her eyes reflecting the fire. They ran. They didn't look back. They scrambled over the chain-link fence at the rear of the yard, tearing their clothes on the razor wire, and dropped into the deep drainage ditch on the other side. They scrambled through the muck, moving blindly in the dark, the roar of the fire fading behind them. When they finally collapsed under the concrete arch of an overpass, completely off the grid, and miles from the yard, the sun was just beginning to crack the horizon. Leo lay on the cold concrete, gasping for air, staring at the ceiling. His empire was ashes. His men were dead. His most trusted friend had betrayed him. He turned his head. Quinn was sitting against the concrete pylon, her knees drawn up, quietly reloading her weapon. She looked battered, bruised, and utterly composed. She caught him looking. "We need a new car," she stated flatly. Leo started to laugh. It was a broken, cynical sound that echoed under the bridge. He laughed until his ribs ached, until the exhaustion finally overtook the panic. He wasn't her boss anymore. He was just a ghost sitting next to a monster in the dark. And for the first time in his life, he felt entirely safe. "Yeah," Leo breathed out, resting his head back against the concrete. "We'll get a new car. They didn't steal a sports car. They stole a 1998 Subaru Outback from a commuter lot behind a diner. It smelled of stale French fries and wet dog, but it had a full tank of gas and four-wheel drive. Quinn hot-wired it in under 40 seconds, her scarred fingers manipulating the exposed wires beneath the steering column With surgical precision, they drove west for 3 hours, putting the burning wreckage of Leo's empire in the rearview mirror. The silence in the car was absolute. Leo watched the highway markers blur past. The adrenaline crash had hit him an hour ago, leaving him shivering in his ruined, mud-caked suit. He felt hollowed out. His men were dead. His territory was gone. Everything his father had built, everything Leo had bled to maintain, had been erased in a single night by a man he had never even met. "We need supplies," Quinn said. It was the first time she had spoken since the overpass. "I have 3,000 in wet hundreds in my money clip," Leo said, his voice raspy, "and a frozen bank account that will flag my location the second I try to access it. Keep the cash. We need off-the-grid logistics." She pulled the Subaru into a decaying strip mall on the outskirts of a dying steel town. The rain had started again, a cold, miserable drizzle. Quinn parked behind a 24-hour pharmacy. "Stay low," she ordered. She slid out of the car, pulling the collar of her peacoat up. Leo watched her walk into the harsh, fluorescent light of the store. He leaned his head against the cold glass of the passenger window. He closed his eyes, and immediately Dom's face flashed behind his eyelids, the look of sheer terror. The betrayal. 20 minutes later, Quinn returned. She tossed a plastic bag into Leo's lap. It contained rubbing alcohol, heavy-duty gauze superglue, a cheap prepaid cell phone, and 2 bottles of generic water. She put the car in drive and pulled into an anonymous motel 2 blocks away. The neon sign buzzed, half the letters burned out. It was a place for people who didn't want to be found. Room 114 smelled of old cigarettes and mildew. There was a single queen bed with a faded floral bedspread. Quinn walked in, locked the deadbolt, and immediately drew the heavy curtains shut, sealing them in the gloom. She didn't sit down. She walked into the small bathroom, turned on the harsh overhead light, and stripped off her coat. Leo sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the silence. He heard the squeak of the faucet, the rush of cold water. He stood up and walked to the bathroom doorway. Quinn was standing over the sink in a grey undershirt. Her left arm was covered in blood. The sleeve was torn. A deep, ugly laceration ran from her shoulder down to her bicep. She hadn't made a sound. She hadn't even limped. She uncapped the rubbing alcohol and poured it directly over the open wound. Her jaw locked tight. The muscles in her neck stood out like steel cables, but she didn't gasp. She just watched the blood and dirt wash down the porcelain drain. "You're hurt," Leo said. It was a stupid, obvious statement, but he didn't know how else to bridge the gap. "Shrapnel from the container in the yard," she said evenly. She picked up the tube of superglue. "Let me," Leo said, stepping into the cramped bathroom. Quinn paused. She looked at him through the mirror. Her muddy hazel eyes were guarded, defensive, calculating the risk. Then slowly she lowered the glue and stepped back. Leo washed his hands, his knuckles bruised and raw. He took the alcohol pad, the gauze, and the glue. He stood beside her, acutely aware of the cold, hard lines of her body. She was corded muscle and scar tissue. "Hold still," he murmured. He worked quietly, pinching the edges of the laceration together and running a bead of glue along the seam. It was a crude battlefield fix, but it stopped the bleeding. He wrapped it tightly in gauze. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was flat, but the edge was gone. "You saved my life twice tonight, Quinn. Pinning a bandage on you is the least I can do." Leo stepped back, leaning against the doorframe. "Who is Holden?" Quinn rolled her injured shoulder, testing the makeshift stitches. "Holden isn't a mobster. He's a corporate liquidator for a private military syndicate. When a foreign cartel or a rogue government wants to expand into a new territory, they don't send goons with baseball bats. They hire Holden. He buys off the politicians, assassinates the local heavyweights, and hands over a clean slate." Leo felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. "And I was the local heavyweight. You and the Grecos. The syndicate wants the port. It's the most lucrative shipping hub on the eastern seaboard. Holden was paid to remove the obstacles. Quinn walked out of the bathroom and sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her gun resting on her knee. She never sat on beds. Beds were traps. "So I'm a ghost," Leo said, walking into the room and sitting heavily on the mattress. "My money is useless. My contacts are either dead or on Holden's payroll. It's over." Quinn looked at him. "Over is a subjective term. I have nothing left." "You have me," she said simply. Leo stared at her in the dim light. She wasn't offering comfort. She was stating a tactical asset. "Why?" Leo asked. "Your contract is null and void. You don't owe me anything. You could walk out that door and disappear. Why stay?" Quinn looked down at her scarred hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the buzzing of the neon sign outside. "Before I came to your office," Quinn started, her voice barely a rasp, "I worked for a man very much like Holden. I cleared boards. I removed obstacles. I didn't ask questions." She paused, swallowing hard. "Then I asked a question, and they killed everyone I ever knew. They burned my life to the ground to teach me a lesson." She looked up at Leo, the muddy hazel of her eyes hardening into something sharp and terrifying. "Holden is part of that machine, and the machine hates friction. Tomorrow we stop running. We become the friction. They didn't plan an assassination. They planned an audit. Holden doesn't operate out of a warehouse or a social club," Quinn explained the next morning. She was tracing lines on a stolen municipal map spread across the cheap motel carpet. "He operates out of a data center, high-frequency trading shell company routing encrypted ledgers. He uses a facility on the South Docks. It looks like a server farm. It acts like a fortress. If he has a private army, we can't just walk in the front door," Leo said, studying the map. "We don't go through the door. We go through the ventilation," Quinn said. "But first we need hardware. Your 9mm and my Glock won't breach level 4 body armor. We need kinetic force." Leo knew a guy. Everyone in his position knew a guy, but this one wasn't a syndicate loyalist. He was an independent arms dealer who operated out of a rusted-out barge moored on the river. A paranoid old Russian named Yuri, who only dealt in cash and didn't care about syndicate politics. They drove the Subaru to the riverfront, under the cover of a thick, grey, overcast sky. The transaction was swift, cold, and expensive. Leo handed over every wet $100 bill in his money clip. In return, Yuri slid 2 heavy canvas duffel bags across the metal table. Inside were 2 FNP-90 submachine guns with armor-piercing ammunition, a dozen fragmentation grenades, breaching charges, and 2 lightweight Kevlar plate carriers. "You make war, Leo?" Yuri asked, his gold teeth flashing in the gloom of the barge. "No," Leo said, looking at Quinn, who was already inspecting the action of the P-90 with terrifying familiarity. "We're doing pest control." By midnight, the rain had returned, a torrential downpour that turned the South Docks into a sprawling, flooded maze of shipping containers and concrete. The data center sat on a concrete pier, a brutalist block of windowless grey stone, surrounded by a 12-foot electrified fence and patrolled by men carrying assault rifles and walking Belgian Malinois. Leo and Quinn lay on the roof of an adjacent warehouse, the rain soaking through their clothes. Leo peered through a set of thermal binoculars. 4 exterior guards, overlapping patrol routes, Leo whispered. "The cameras are thermal. They'll see us the second we touch the fence." "They won't," Quinn said. She was linking a small weatherproof tablet to a localized radio jammer she had built from scavenged motel electronics and Yuri's spare parts. "Holden uses a centralized security network. It's efficient, but it has a single point of failure. The localized nodes ping the main server every 60 seconds. If the ping is delayed by a packet flood, the system reboots the optical sensors to clear the cache. It gives us an 8-second blind spot." Leo looked at her. "You know how to hack a military-grade security grid. "I know how to break things," she corrected him. "Ready." Leo tightened the straps on his plate carrier and racked the charging handle of his P90. He wasn't afraid. The fear had burned out in the impound lot. Now there was only a cold, methodical anger. "Do it," Leo said. Quinn tapped the screen. "Rebooting. 8 seconds. Go." They dropped from the warehouse roof onto the wet concrete below, landing silently. They sprinted across the open ground. The heavy rain masked the sound of their boots. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. They reached the fence. Quinn slapped a small strip of C4 to the concrete base where the fence anchored. 6 seconds. 7 seconds. Click. The cameras whirred, the red lights flickering back on. They were already pressed flat in the mud beneath the camera's blind spot. A patrol guard rounded the corner, his dog straining at the leash. The dog stopped its ears, perking up. It smelled them. It opened its mouth to bark. Quinn moved faster than the dog could react. She slipped her suppressed pistol from her holster and fired twice. Thwip. Thwip. The dog went limp. The guard opened his mouth to shout, reaching for his radio. Leo stood up smoothly, raising his P90. He fired a short, controlled burst. The armor-piercing rounds punched cleanly through the guard's ceramic plate. The man dropped without a sound. Leo looked down at the dead man, then at the gun in his hands. He had ordered hundreds of hits in his life. He had never felt the recoil of the weapon that executed them. It felt heavy. It felt necessary. "Breaching," Quinn whispered. She triggered the small charge on the fence base. It didn't explode. It cracked the concrete just enough to loosen the anchor bolts. She pulled the heavy steel mesh back, creating a gap just large enough to slip through. They moved into the shadow of the data center. "The main server room is on the 3rd sub-level," Quinn said, consulting a schematic she had pulled from the dead guard's PDA. "Holden will be there. It's the only room with a hardline connection to the offshore accounts. Once he realizes the perimeter is breached, he'll try to initiate a total asset transfer and wipe the drives." "He doesn't get to walk away," Leo said, his voice hard. "No." Quinn agreed. She pulled a breaching charge from her duffel bag and pressed it against the heavy steel reinforced door leading to the service stairwell. He doesn't. The stairwell was bathed in harsh red emergency lighting. The blast from the breaching charge had triggered the alarms. A deafening rhythmic siren pulsed through the concrete walls, accompanied by the digitized voice of the automated security system, warning of a hostile intrusion. Quinn didn't run. She flowed down the stairs, her weapon raised her eyes, scanning the angles. Leo stayed 3 steps behind, watching her 6. They operated in total silence, communicating only through sharp gestures and taps on the shoulder. They hit the second landing. The heavy steel door burst open. 3 of Holden's cleaners poured into the stairwell, their rifles raised. Quinn didn't hesitate. She dropped to one knee, making herself a smaller target, and squeezed the trigger. The P90 chattered, spitting a stream of brass casings into the air. The armor-piercing rounds shredded the men in the doorway, throwing them backward into the corridor. Leo stepped over her, laying down covering fire down the hall to keep any reinforcements pinned. "Clear!" Leo shouted over the sirens. Quinn was already moving, stepping over the bodies, her boots slipping slightly on the slick, blood-covered tiles. They reached the 3rd sub-level. The air down here was different. It was freezing cold, heavily air-conditioned, to keep the massive server banks from overheating. The noise of the cooling fans was a continuous, deafening roar that swallowed the sirens. They stood before a set of double-reinforced glass doors. Beyond them was the server farm, a massive, cavernous room filled with towering black racks of blinking blue and green lights. At the far end of the room, behind a raised glass command console, stood a man in a bespoke grey suit. He was typing frantically on a keyboard. 4 heavily armored guards stood in a perimeter around the console. "Holden." Leo breathed, recognizing the face from a dossier Dom had shown him weeks ago. "He's transferring the funds," Quinn said. "We have 90 seconds before the accounts lock and the drives wipe." "How do we play it?" Leo asked. Quinn looked at him. She reached into her vest and pulled out a fragmentation grenade. She pulled the pin holding the spoon down with her thumb. "Loud," she said. She kicked the glass doors open and threw the grenade high into the air. It arced over the server racks, landing perfectly in the center of the 4 guards. "Frag," one of the men screamed. The explosion tore through the freezing air. Shrapnel shredded the expensive glass of the command console and tore into the server racks, sending sparks, cascading like a waterfall. Before the smoke could clear, Quinn was inside. She moved through the narrow aisles between the servers like a ghost. A guard, bleeding from the blast, stumbled into the aisle, raising his weapon. Quinn didn't shoot. She closed the distance, grabbed the barrel of his rifle, and drove the butt of her P90 upward into his throat. As he collapsed, she unholstered her sidearm and shot him twice in the chest. Leo took the right flank, his gun up. A guard popped out from behind a rack, firing blindly. Bullets sparked off the metal inches from Leo's face. Leo stepped out, squared his shoulders, and fired a 3-round burst. The guard fell backward. The server room was a chaotic strobe light of sparks, muzzle flashes, and the steady blue blink of surviving hard drives. Quinn reached the raised platform. The remaining 2 guards stepped in front of Holden, their weapons trained on the stairs. Quinn didn't slow down. She dove into a slide, gliding across the polished floor. As she slid, she fired her P90 one-handed, taking out the knee of the guard on the left. The man screamed, collapsing. She popped up from the slide seamlessly, tossing the empty submachine gun aside and drawing her combat knife in her left hand, her pistol in her right. The last guard swung his rifle toward her. She batted the barrel away with the heavy steel frame of her pistol and drove the knife upward, finding the gap in his body armor just beneath the armpit. The blade sank to the hilt. She twisted it, pulled it free, and shoved the dying man aside. Silence fell over the server room, save for the hum of the fans and the hiss of broken cooling pipes. Holden was backed against the shattered glass of his console. He looked terrified. His bespoke suit was covered in dust and blood. He looked from his dead elite guards to the small woman in the black peacoat standing before him. Leo walked up the stairs of the platform, his weapon lowered. He stood beside Quinn. Holden held up his hands. "Wait. Wait. Whatever they're paying you, I can double it. I can wire 50 million into an untraceable account right now. Just let me hit enter." He reached for the keyboard. Quinn raised her pistol and shot him in the right hand. Holden shrieked, falling to his knees, cradling his shattered fingers against his chest. "You don't understand," Holden gasped, crying. "The Syndicate. They'll kill you. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. You can't stop the machine." Quinn looked down at him. Her eyes were empty, devoid of any triumph or vindication. Just the cold, mechanical reality of a completed job. "I don't want to stop the machine," Quinn said softly. "I just want to break its teeth." She raised her gun and shot him once in the forehead. Holden collapsed his head, hitting the keyboard. The monitors flickered, an error message flashing red across the screen. The transfer had failed. Leo looked at the dead man. He felt the heavy weight of his past life lift off his shoulders, replaced by something entirely new, entirely terrifying, and entirely freeing. He looked at Quinn. She was already reloading her magazine, her face an unreadable mask. "So," Leo said, his voice echoing in the massive room. "What now?" Quinn slid the magazine home. She looked around the ruined server room, then finally looked at him. "We need a new car," she said. Leo smiled, a genuine, cynical, entirely exhausted smile. "I'll drive," he said. They walked out of the freezing server room together, stepping over the wreckage, 2 ghosts fading back into the static of a violent world. They didn't have an empire anymore. But they had something far more dangerous. They had each other. If this brutal descent into the underworld kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button to let the algorithm know you crave the grit. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the quiet ones are the deadliest. And if you want more deeply human, action-packed narratives that pull no punches and skip the cliches, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a chapter. Drop a comment below. Who would you hire as your shadow? Stay sharp, and see you in the next one.